Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. And today we'll be talking about hedgerows, and I'm delighted to be joined by Minister of State for Agriculture, Pippa Hackett, who has responsibility for land use and biodiversity. Minister, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's great to be here. I'm delighted that you're having a week of hedgerow discussions, and look, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you cover, and it's an honour to be able to open it, so thank you.
Great, delighted to have you. Also, we're joined by Dr. Catherine Keena, who is our Teagasc Countryside Management Specialist. Catherine, you're welcome.
Good morning, everybody.
And also we're joined by Pat Murphy, who is head of the Teagasc Knowledge Transfer Programme, Environment Knowledge Transfer Programme. Pat, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Great. So, Minister, thank you for agreeing to launch Hedgerow Week for us. We're obviously, hedgerows are an important part of the landscape in Ireland, and in Teagasc we're developing programs and training to support farmers and I suppose the wider community in protecting hedgerows. From your perspective, Minister, how important are hedgerows as part of the work you're doing in the Department of Agriculture?
Look, I think hedgerows are really important, and when you look at the sort of fabric and the design of Irish countryside, it is really the hedgerows that give us that patchwork appearance that that makes us quite unique in that regard, that we have relatively small holdings that are divided up with hedges, and the age range in a hedge is can be quite remarkable. They say if you have a mature hedge, and if you pace something like 30 meters and count the species in that, for every species there, the hedge potentially might be 100 years old for each species. I'm talking about a mature hedge, not obviously one that's planted recently, but it might be worthwhile farmers even doing that if they have hedges that they know have been there for generations. Pace along the hedge for 30 meters and how many different species of plants are there, and that gives you an indication of how old and how long that hedge has been there. But I think there's also besides the sort of cultural significance of hedges, the biodiversity support that hedges provide are huge, and maybe in times past farmers we've seen hedges as dividing fields, but the support that they can provide is vast, and we're becoming more and more aware of that, the importance of that, and how we manage the hedges obviously will deliver for biodiversity. So I think that's really, for example, like most hedgerow species, they mightn't blossom or fruit. It'll be a second year's growth that potentially that will happen. So, I mean, if you're cutting your hedges annually, you're probably unlikely to have any blossom or fruit. So we do talk about different ways of cutting hedges, and maybe we're getting into a situation now where less is more.
Yes. Oh, well, look, that's something Catherine will be talking about today and also next week as well. But in terms of the programme for government, Minister, what are the priorities in relation to biodiversity, and how do you see these being incorporated into the next Common Agricultural Policy in the strategy that we have to develop within Ireland?
I think in the current programme for government, I think biodiversity gets a mention about 50 times. So compared with previous programmes for governments, there's been a distinct shift in how we value biodiversity. Look, our own government has declared a climate and biodiversity emergency, and really, I think farmers have the greatest potential to deliver potentially for both of those issues. And I think that has to be embraced as an opportunity for Irish farmers. And I've total faith that we can do it, and with the work that Teagasc are doing, I think it's really something to aim for, not to be seen as a challenge, but as an opportunity. But I mean, within the programme for government, I mean, there are a lot of, the priorities for biodiversity. I suppose we don't have a real measure of where we are at with farm biodiversity. So a lot of the commitments are around assessing where biodiversity is at on farms. So we want to measure, do a hedgerow survey. We want to carry out baseline biodiversity surveys on farms, so we know where we're starting from, because ultimately if we want to improve it, we need to be able to measure that improvement. So I think that's important. But I mean, we're also looking at aspects such as maybe soil biodiversity, and we forget that, you know, actually most of the biodiversity we have is below our feet. And the value of soils, I mean, I think tomorrow is World Soil Day or National Soil Day. I think the value of soil biodiversity often gets forgotten about also. So look, it's huge. The scope is huge there, and I'm looking forward to seeing it implemented, a lot of these measures.
No, I agree with you. The soil is often the out of sight, out of mind part of the landscape. In Ireland, as you know, we have a considerable areas of land that are farmed intensively. Can we do more to value these farming systems and further improve their environmental contribution? Or, you know, there's a view, some people say, well, look, we'll farm intensively in those areas and let those areas be almost a sacrifice for biodiversity. That's a minority view, I suspect, but just to put that to you.
No, it is an interesting perspective, because you know, we talk about this room for nature, and you know, you could maybe have that you know, areas that are intensively managed, and then, you know, other areas that aren't so. But I think it is a minority view. I think ultimately, if we want biodiversity to work across our country, we need, you know, every piece of the land delivering in some way for that, or doing its best to do that. So I mean, I think we, on the whole, like, unfortunately, we're still pretty much in a situation where our human actions in Ireland even are not delivering, you know, enough for biodiversity, for water quality, for air quality, for emissions. So we're still on the sort of slightly downward trajectory of that, and we really need to try and certainly stabilize and move it upwards. But I mean, you have examples of intensive farms that are working well for biodiversity. Even the Bride project, the EIP project in East Cork, you know, we have intensive dairy farmers there, and they're all working collectively together in a region to support biodiversity. And I think there's certainly potential in those models to expand that. I mean, we do have the strategies from the EU that want us to use less pesticides, less fertilizer, and all that. And I think if we can embrace that, and I know Teagasc do work in this, in terms of having to, you know, trying to reduce our, say, fertilizer use and dependency. And I think that, you know, all of that needs to come together. And I think working with farmers as we design those, maybe different ways of farming will be all important as well. You know, we can have the best ideas, but if it's not implemented on the ground, or farmers don't want to do them, they're not really worth the paper they're written on. So it's important to get that buy-in.
Are there any particular measures that you'd like to see in any future agri-environmental schemes?
I think any agri-environmental scheme, look, I mean, ultimately, I suppose the purpose of them, not only, you know, besides providing, if you like, farmers with an additional income, they have to deliver for nature, and they, you know, they have to ultimately deliver for biodiversity and the environment. I think environmental schemes should be simple. They shouldn't be seen as a burden. And I think the simpler they can be made, the better. And look, we're talking about hedgerows even this week. I mean, even a mechanism to enhance the hedges, to manage them in a different way. You know, that could be a very simple measure. It would probably save farmers money. Maybe certain sectors mightn't be too enthralled with that. They might see it as a threat to their own, you know, incomes. But I think if we carefully manage hedgerows, I think there should be scope in there. I mean, that's just one idea, but I think whatever schemes we come up with, they are going to move towards that sort of results-based. So we have delivered, we pay on their delivery, and they have to be simple. They have to be non-burdensome, and I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. Just, Minister, in relation to you know, educating and informing farmers about the best practice in relation to hedgerow quality, how do you think we should go about doing that, or improving the awareness?
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, in budget 2021, we did secure funding for biodiversity training on farms. So for farmers. So I think there's an awareness element there that we need to share. I think that peer-to-peer thing is nearly the best way to do it between farmers. I think they probably learn best in that regard. I mean, I know I do, talking to farmers, you get little nuggets here and there, and oh, I'll try that. So I think that's important. And I think even simple things, like, I enjoy biodiversity, I enjoy like bird species, but I don't know every bird species. I don't know what they sound like, and I wouldn't necessarily identify them all. So I mean, I want to be educated myself on my own farm to be able to identify biodiversity when I see it, plant species, different types of species in the hedge, and what they can deliver. And I think that that's all part of that knowledge and that education and that awareness of the value of biodiversity. And of course, biodiversity delivers. Besides that, it provides pollinators for crops. You know, if we don't have biodiversity, we don't have the pollinators, we mightn't get the crops pollinated. So I mean, there's a direct impact on how we farm. And again, going back to, I suppose, the biodiversity in soils, if we get that piece right and we build organic matter in soils and we have a really functioning soil that might not need as much fertilizer to perform. And I think they're all things we should be looking at moving towards, and sharing that knowledge. And look, there's farmers doing all sorts of things across the country, trialing things themselves, different ways of farming, different, you know, delivering different grass types and mixed species swards, and all sorts of elements there that we can share that knowledge, you know, learn from it and understand the science behind it, of course, and move on from there.
You mentioned that that biodiversity training budget. Do you see any potential for expanding that to other areas, or indeed expanding the overall budget to a wider audience?
Hopefully. I mean, I think we were hopefully thinking it might train in the region of 50,000 farmers when it's rolled out. Now, look, it's at the early stages. We haven't even devised how it might, but it is for next year. So, you know, it's going to have to be, you know, taken off the ground and delivered. But I think again, it'll inform us moving forwards. We are in this transition period before we've the fully sort of funded CAP round again. So I think there's scope now in the next 2 years to trial things, see how they work best. I think ultimately something on biodiversity really has to be delivered on farm. You have to sort of get into, you know, you have to be there, I think, to deliver it. And hopefully when COVID moves away as swiftly as possible, we'll be able to get back to more sort of on farm visits. And I think that would be important, yeah.
Minister, there's many farmers out there wondering about the next agri-environmental scheme. And I know there has been discussion about an interim scheme or a scheme to bridge that gap between the two caps. Is there any developments on that side of things?
Well, look, that's obviously going to have to be ready for next year very soon as well. And look, at the department, we are working on that. I mean, we have, I think at this stage it's going to be, because it is a pilot scheme, and we want to essentially trial as many possible options as possible within that and learn from it over the next couple of years as to which works best and how farmers found them. So, I mean, look, that work is ongoing, and look, I'd expect, you know, some sort of announcement, you know, shortly in terms of how and when and why. But again, it's about, I suppose, farmer engagement, and we are certainly moving towards that sort of results-based payment model. And I think that's, it's worth keeping that in mind, I think, moving forward, because there's scope there to, you know, for some farmers to maybe do really well quite soon in that situation, and maybe other farmers maybe have to wait a bit longer because they're not quite to the level. I mean, up to now we've had action-based schemes where you get paid upfront, which is fine, or you know, you get paid for doing an action, and there hasn't really been a measure of the result, say in the glass scheme and so forth. But I mean, we do have these 23 EIP style locally led schemes, which seem to very much a results based. So you have your bride project, you've got your pearl mussel project, your hen harrier. So I think that regionalization and localization of environmental schemes is really important. And look, they're a little bit more difficult maybe to design, but I think when you get that farmer buy-in and it's grassroots led and farmers come together essentially to decide how it'll work, I think that's really, really important, and that's really empowering for farmers, and they're in it together. I think that's vital.
I know there's a lot of respect at the EU level for the work that's happening in Ireland actually in relation to EIPs, yes, and how they are almost a test bed for future schemes. We have a question, Minister, in relation to the issue relating to the habitat destruction of this ineligible areas. You're a farmer, Minister, you understand how the BPS operates, and how farmers are being penalised effectively for retaining habitat, as some people describe it. Has there been any progress on that area? Because I know it is an area of deep frustration for the whole farming community.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it's great that it is a frustrating area, because I think that gives us powers, and it pushes us as ministers in agriculture and the government indeed to keep looking at that. So I mean, certainly my own department are looking at those eligibility rules, and ultimately, land should be eligible when it's delivering for the objectives of the CAP, and the CAP objectives are evolving. After each round of the CAP, they are evolving, and likewise, in parallel, the eligibility rules should evolve. And they sort of haven't evolved, whereas the objectives of the CAP have. So it's certainly something I'm very much interested in getting sorted out, because it's very difficult to deliver on one hand for biodiversity when you're restricted on the other by your eligibility of your land. So look, I'll be all over it anyway. I'll do what I can to make sure that is that's rectified.
Brilliant. One final question, if I may. We had just a question in relation to agroforestry and the future role that has to play in the Irish landscape. I know there's a lot of discussion around it. But do you see any schemes or programs coming forward to support or to encourage that within Ireland?
I think so. I think we've really very little land in agroforestry, and I think it's really, in a way, it's a win-win for farmers who. There's always this sort of forestry or farming thing, and look, agroforestry does both, and there's co-benefits. It seems from the research I've read, not only for the trees, also for the land in which and even if there's animals within that land, the benefits are there. I hope to look, again, forestry is almost aligned. The forestry program's aligned almost with the CAP, even though it's all exchequer funded. So we'll have this transition period as well. But I think there is scope to open up more agroforestry supports, and again, I'm very interested in pushing for that and delivering for that. Look, forestry is still in somewhat of a crisis at the moment in terms of timber supply. We are working incredibly hard to change that, and there are some, there have been signs of improvements in the last sort of couple of months. We're still not there, but look, hopefully that will continue, that improvement, and we'll be in a couple of months we'll be in a better place. But agroforestry, certainly, I think it'd be great. I'd love to see way more agroforestry, and I think it's something I think farmers would embrace, because they can continue to farm and they get supported for growing trees and storing carbon. So great, win-win.
Minister, thank you very much for your time this morning, and for officially launching Hedgerow Week for us, and hope to then maybe you can enjoy some of the publications and the videos next week. We have some excellent speakers along the way, and want to wish you well, and if it's not too early, wish you and your team a happy Christmas. And
thank you.
We maybe hope to have you back again at some stage.
Absolutely, and look forward to getting down to Athenry someday, see all those sheep.
Absolutely, we're delighted to welcome you down.
Thank you. Take care. Okay. All the best.
Thank you very much. Take care.
All the best. Thank you.
So, Catherine, we're going to go back to you now. Catherine, you're going to provide us with a presentation on what's in store for us with Hedgerow Week next week. You've been working hard on this, Catherine, for the last few months.
Yes. Shall I share the screen, Mark?
You can indeed, yes. Yeah.
Am I there?
Might just go back to your first slide.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Is the second slide showing, Mark? How do
you're on this? You just need to go up to display settings there, Catherine, and just change that to show the full slide, because we can see presenter mode here.
Yeah. Hide presenter view.
Yeah, that should do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay,
Catherine, thanks for that. And please, if you have questions, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And we'd be delighted to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. So, Catherine, over to you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mark. and thank you to Minister Hackett for launching Hedgerow Week. Today we're going to focus on growing hedges for a sustainable future, and all the presentations during the week are explaining the values of hedges as to why we should grow more. Starting with on Monday, we're giving the background to the level of hedgerows, the history, the heritage. Tuesday, we're moving on to the biodiversity, the birds, bats, bees, plants. Wednesday, we're talking about the other values, the carbon, the water, the food from hedges. And then we move into 3 days of management, planting new hedges, routine hedge cutting, which was touched on a while ago there by the Minister, and rejuvenating. So we shall perhaps go into some of them more after, Mark, but I shall concentrate first on a few slides on growing new hedges.
Great. So
why we had a webinar earlier and this was covered in more detail. So we just, again, to reiterate, the biodiversity in hedgerows is fantastic. The birds, maybe 55 of our birds use hedges, our mammals use hedges, all of our 9 bat species use them, particularly for corridors, but also for feeding and roosting if they're suitable. Our bees need flowers, and flowers can be in hedges, our solitary bumble and honeybee. The moths come out at night and they use the hedgerows, and similarly with the butterflies. And the plants, Dr. John Feehan told us during the week about 100 plant species associated with hedges. So they are just, a hive of biodiversity. The other topics that will be touched on during the week is the carbon and what we're doing to get more information on that. We have a lovely topic on food from hedges. Foraging for food is becoming more, of interest to more people. How hedges protect water quality, which is, again, a major part of our work at the moment. And then farmers always appreciate hedges for shelter. So lots of reasons why to plant. So then I shall move on to how we do it. And the first most important conversation to have, and I think this is the most misunderstood topic. So I just want to explain about the 2 types of hedges that we have. And before you plant, you must decide which you are going for. Both are good. I'd love to have both on every farm, and there's a place for both. But just to put it very simply, now there's a wide range of hedges. You could come up with 10 different, ranges, but they basically fall into topped and untopped. So the topped would be the traditional hedge. What is a hedge? A hedge is a man-made artificial habitat. At the hedge, as we know what a hedge is, with a dense base, a managed hedge. Okay, and this one has got a bad name because management can be very bad, but it can be very good. So, and I would, I strongly argue that this, provided if this is what you want, there is a place for it, done right, and will always need management. Okay, the untopped hedge, then some people would even say it's not a hedge. I would absolutely want to keep it in the broad hedgerow family, because it originated as a hedge, but it escaped from management, has become a line of trees. Some people call it linear woodland. If the space at the base, it can be outgrowths and it can be practically a woodland. But it is you can see clearly topped and untopped. I think I'm nearly coming down to being the simplest way of explaining. So before you plant, you must decide which you're aiming for. And as I said, both are good. So to understand, we need to understand for both of these and how trees and shrubs grow, and this what we call apical dominance. So you see the little sapling on the left-hand side. Now that can be an oak tree or it can be a whitethorn, but both of those have apical dominance. So in other words, they want to grow up into being a tree. And you can see the picture there, that's a 10-year-old hedge. one that we actually coppiced during the week in Clonakilty, in Teagasc, the Agricultural College, where it has got stalky at the base, and the preference for that particular hedge was to bring it back to being a dense base and managed correctly. So, and then the picture on the bottom is where, again, that sapling has never been topped, and eventually its whole purpose in life is to grow into being a white thorn tree with a single stem and a mature, a canopy, and that is what you will end up with. Beautiful, beautiful top. May not be so good at the base, for some of the birds to nest, like the first picture I showed. So both have different advantages and both can be good. But it's really important when you have a hedge, both the existing ones and the newly planted ones. And this is where it has all gone wrong, because people have failed to understand the difference between the two hedges. And the principle is that wherever you cut a tree, because we're talking, they're all trees, trees, shrubs, people get mixed up again. Wherever you cut, the new shoots will grow immediately below the cut. And so you can see on the top there, when you cut it, one becomes probably 5, it's just showing us 2 in that. And then when you cut again, from a cutting point of view, this diagram has come from our routine cutting leaflet, which has been around about 20 years, to explain that when you go back to cut, you always come a wee bit above the previous cut, and then each of them multiplies. So that diagram was specifically for cutting. You can see the example on the bottom of the screen, where the hedge was cut at whatever, 3-4 foot high, and pulled all the growth up to that point, and has turned into a row of stalks with bushes on the top, what we call toilet brush hedges. And you can see there where the line is going back each year down to the same level. And that's an extreme, well, that's a very good picture, I suppose, to show it. But that, in effect, is what a lot of our hedges are, our older hedges are. Now, in summer, everything looks good. So it's only from now, at this time of the year, when you look down and see where the growth is. Because don't forget, most of our hedges, as we'll explain, again, John Feehan talks about the history of hedges, and most of our hedges were planted, apart from our townland boundaries, which date before the 17th century. Most of our hedges belong about 200 years ago. And what happened was, when machines became available 40, 50 years ago, strong enough to cut them mechanically, they were cut at that 4 foot high, and has pulled all the growth up to that level. Whereas, again, we have a fantastic video and documents from the Hedge Laying Association of Ireland, Owen Donnelly, where he has coppiced a hedge. And again, always, if you're bringing down the height, you go to the base. Rather than what's in that picture there. So that's really important. And you can see the picture on the top, on the right hand side would be the ash tree, very typical in our hedges, where that would have been a tall tree, and where it's cut, then the growth appears then about the 3 foot high. And it clearly explains why ash there is not a good species to be cut in a hedgerow. When you have, and we'll come on to those species again, but just remember that ash one there. Okay, so having decided, am I going to have a line of trees, or am I going to have a hedge, a topped hedge? And as I said, both are good. I love both. We should have both on every farm. But then we talk about the species. So the hedging species that can belong in either of those two hedges and the backbone of all our hedges is the thorns, black thorn and white thorn in particular, and fabulous holly in some parts of the country more than others. A fantastic hedging species, very slow growing. So our thorns will be always the basis of our farm hedges. But the species that can go into that topped hedge or the untopped hedge, because they tolerate topping, They may not be just quite as the thorny ones, but they will definitely tolerate topping and can live within that. The managed hedge situation are the spindle, the Guelder rose, the hazel, and then the ones on the bottom there, the dog rose, both the flowers and the rose hips, and the woodbine. They're climbers, so they may not be, they're not trees, but they're the climbers that belong in the hedge. So they're the species I would suggest for all hedges, but predominantly white thorn, probably white thorn or black thorn. Okay, so they're safe. And just one word of warning there, to be careful. We'll talk about provenance in a minute, but even the species, the dog rose that we have, you know, again, I'm not going all Latin here, but Rosa canina, and then there's another one that's sold regularly, and it's a really invasive one that should not be planted out on farms, Rosa rugosa. So just be very careful when we really want to plant native species, and as I said, we'll touch on provenance in a moment. Now, the second lot, we only have about 20 native species in tree species, and some of them are, you know, multiples of different types of willows, and you know, we have 2 birches, and so there really isn't that many. We all, farmers and advisors, it's really easy to get to know our species once we just stick to our native ones. Don't start learning in a place like a town or Teagasc Hedgerow, where you'd have planted, you know, ornamental species that really can confuse you. So we only want our natives out on the land. So then the trees that we're talking about, the ash, the oak, the willow, the willow or sally, the aspen, the aspen is one of our native popular. So they'd be kind of the bigger trees. Then we have the alder, the rowan or mountain ash, the birch, the cherry, the crabapple, the whitebeam, all fantastic trees. The problem is, if they're put into a hedge and topped, they both destroy the hedge. You would either have a hedge nor a tree. So, and that's what has happened in the past. People love the idea, have bought the idea of having lots of species, put in lots of species, and manage it in the wrong way. So these either, if we're planting a hedge that is never going to be topped, we can put every species we like into it, all of these and the other ones. If we put these into a topped hedge, we must retain them as individuals. So in other words, if we really want to maintain that hedge as a topped hedge, we don't want too many trees in it, because trees are actually bad for the hedge, but they're good for obviously other things. Personally, I think a lot of the trees, we could put the trees like these in field corners. Groves of trees would be fantastic. Again, there's no reason why every native tree wouldn't be on every farm. Now, obviously taking into account that some are more appropriate in the area and the soil, etc. But there's no harm in trying to have the 20 trees are on your farm. But perhaps these could belong in field corners. So they can all go into the untopped hedge. If they go into the topped hedge, not too many. And number 2, the reason I think the glass went for the very simple of literally white thorn, black thorn, holly. And I actually liked that idea. It was very simple, and there was still room for trees. And where people in the past, where people have planted trees, ash would be the most popular, good for firewood, fantastic. But where we have both in our routinely cut hedges and our newly planted hedges, farmers and contractors tend to leave these trees at the expense of leaving the thorns. And the thorns are particularly valuable for the flowers for the bees. Now you can see there the cherry and the crabapple, some of those, they all flower obviously, but some are more in a different way. But the thorns are particularly important. The white thorn for the bees in Ireland is absolutely critical. I mean, we don't need to be talking about planting new flowers. We just need to manage the flowers that we have on the farm, and the white thorn would be the huge one there. So that's my point about the trees. So make sure if you have 100 meters of a hedge and you decide if you're planting a hedge that's going to be topped and managed as a dense space, you might want 5 or 6 trees in it. You must leave the thorns before you even think of planting these ones, okay? And if you run out of space, then put the trees in the corner. Just to be very clear, the ones we don't want ornamental species. From a biodiversity point of view, we don't want the introduced species. The chestnut, sycamore and beech would be the ones that kind of confuse us. They have been here about 200 years as opposed to the 10,000 years of our native species. Not as good to support wildlife and not recommended from a biodiversity point of view. Native provenance. What this means is the species we talked about have been here for 10,000 years. The provenance means that the plant is grown from a seed that came from an Irish tree or an Irish flower. So the seed the seed has also been here for 10,000 years as opposed to being imported. So the species can be native, but the provenance may not be. And this sadly has been the case for a lot of what we have planted, and we've struggled with this issue. Back 25 years, I started writing about please plant native provenance. It doesn't always happen, but it is best for biodiversity. It would be fantastic. I think now is an opportunity to seriously think about this, how we can support it. Donal Flanagan is our Teagasc nursery stock advisor. He works with the young tree production sector, and they have really modernized in the last 10 years and are well fit to compete with our European counterparts. I think what we need is a lot of clarity and support, to be very clear what we want out of them. Now, the Teagasc Horticulture, our Teagasc Horticulture Advisory unit have stakeholders with the nursery stock sector in general, and they are going to talk in particular to the young tree production sector. In other words, the people who are growing plants for sale. And I'm going to work with Donal, and it would be lovely if we could. We need a run-in period. We need 3 years to collect the seed, sow the plants, and use them for growing in Ireland. But it obviously is the way to go forward. And now there are people doing that, and I think we need to support them and be clear that how much better that is than from a biodiversity point of view than bringing in plants which are grown outside Ireland from seed, again, grown outside Ireland and grown from seed that comes from outside Ireland. Okay, so just move on to the planting. How to plant, again, this one has been covered very much over the years, and for this particular week we went to Galway to Henry and Patricia and Enda Walsh, who are a dairy farmer in derogation near Oranmore, who has decided to plant a new hedge for the first time. Now, it's very much a stone wall farm, but he sees the value in hedges. He sees the value in splitting a large 10-hectare field. So top of the right, put down a line, got the mini digger in to turn over the soil, makes it much easier for planting. As you can see, that field is quite good, but it's much easier to plant having turned over the soil. Just a reminder, before you plant, if you're storing plants for long, to heel them into the ground, top of the right picture, then they can stay for a month or so, and always keep them in the bag, not to let the roots dry out while you're planting. So again, planting 6 to the meter there with a spade and slit planting, second person is invaluable, and you fly along doing it. The next thing then he did was identified the whitethorn tree from our one and put a marker on it, a marker so that it will never be cut, and number 2, that the hares or rabbits might come along and cut the one we don't want to cut. We're cutting the rest of them. Because again, I must go back to saying that Henry values a hedge with a really dense base, and that's the option he's going for. He is going for the topped hedge, okay? So we got the old silage plastic. He cut off the 4-foot strip off it, rolled it up, pushed it over the shoots, which he is in the middle picture there, has pruned them down to about 1 inch above the ground. And while we used to recommend putting gravel, I have now in recent years found it's very simple to push the sides of the plastic in, as you can see there in the bottom right hand picture, and it just sticks to the ground, and providing you just need to be careful for the first week that it doesn't pull back over the plants, but that is very successful. The purpose of this then picture on the left there, so where the single stems have, you saw the picture earlier of the one in Clonakilty, where it grew up and kept above the grass, so there was a good stem on it. In this case then, instead of the one stem at an inch above ground level, there will be 5. So this is where we have the growth where we want it, and you can see then what happens. And again, not to forget to protect from livestock as little as possible from a livestock point of view if you're doing this type of hedge, because if the plan is that you'll be taking down the wire in 5 years, so single strand electric, let the animals graze under it, can be managed easier in future. It can be stock proof, and just the picture there on the right is the rabbits and the hares. If you have a problem, some people get away without doing anything. It can be very temporary. It's only for a few weeks, but whatever is needed needs to be done. Okay, so again, to go back to the principle of this type of a hedge then, so in year 2 then, Henry and anybody else that has planted a hedge, in year 1 it was cut an inch above the ground. So again, there was 5, there was more than 5 there was about 7. And in year 2 then, again, it shoots back up about 2 foot, but come back and cut it another inch above the previous cut. So now instead of 5, we'll have 25. Do that in year 3, you have just a mass of growth. It's not a race to the top. It's inch by inch by inch by inch. If you want the hedge like we have on the right, which is an absolute mass of growth, and where there is no need for a wire fence. So if some farmers particularly like this, and that's good, but it only acceptable if it's the right height, a good height, and also you can see there it contains the trees, both the mature trees, if the big larger trees, and in particular the thorn trees. Okay, so I suppose the purpose of this week, I'm saying we're planting a seed so that we were the seed of inspiration that farmers will plant new native hedgerows and over the next year or few years. And that's my message really for Hedgerow Week, why we plant, and more than anything to inspire people to plant new native Irish hedges.
Thank you very much, Catherine. You gave a good overview. So we are in the heart of hedgerow planting season now, really, aren't we? What is the...
It's actually a bit early. Now, again, it's down to each farm. Henry there, a dairy farmer, just would have no time in spring to do it. Personally, if time allows, I would tend to go for the later as possible, because you have less time of it sitting in the ground. Now Henry will look after his, but you know, if you plant it in February, you've only 6 weeks before it all takes off. So, but any time in the dormant season, you can plant.
So Catherine, to talk about next week, so you have an exciting lineup of talks and articles coming up. How can people access this? Because of the COVID restrictions, obviously we can't have indoor events and so on.
Yeah, so I think
decided to go for a slightly different format.
Yeah, I think it's given us an opportunity, Mark. I would not have done what I've achieved if I had been running around doing events. So I think we'll reach a different audience. We're going to have a stack of material on the website eventually. So for after this, on every aspect of hedges. So each day we will deal with a topic. The material will be released each day in all the normal media channels, print and social media, through Twitter, etc. People are far more aware of that than I am. So the 30 topics are covered. So what I did was I went to the expert on that topic, or an expert. So for example, I suppose I want to move on with all my habitat work to kind of saying that habitats are good for birds and bats and bees, to saying which birds, which bats, which bees. So for example, on Hedges, Niall Hatch told us about the birds that live in the hedges, the specific ones. Same with the bees. Tina Ockney from Bat Conservation Ireland talked about how bats use hedges and which the pipistrelles that particularly use them. The bees, Stephanie Maher from Trinity College talked about the bees, and she had a lovely example of we were looking at a willow tree, and she had the Andrina clarkella, a lovely name of the solitary bee that lives only on willow. So, and then John Fionn talked about the plants. So that's the biodiversity. The next day was the food. So Chef Paul Flynn from the Tannery and a local cookery demonstrator, Rosemary Cusack, went foraging and came up with all the things you can do with it. Just amazing stuff for anybody with an interest in cooking, or just, you know, it's just a lovely childhood memory, I think, for any of us that have children to appreciate that side of the hedge. Mm-hmm. So on and on. Then we move on to the management, Mark.
So this social media will be covered with Hedgerow Week. The hashtag is Hedgerow Week 2020. And if you go to the Teagasc homepage, there's a link on the homepage there where that will be updated on a daily basis. I see you have some John Feehan there speaking on Monday. John is a really excellent presenter, has a great view on biodiversity. Stuart Green there on the mapping side of things. Yeah, you have farmers being interviewed as well. I see.
Yes,
Henry
yeah. And contractors, Mark. We talked about contractors earlier. We have two fantastic people who cut hedges. They actually were the winners of our competition, our hedge cutting competition last year. So again, we went and we talked to Tony Mullins, a farmer who cuts his own hedges, and in Cork, and Liam Hurley, a contractor in Limerick, who was passionate about doing this and passionate about learning. You know, he had already really taken on the height and the shape, but had missed out on the new tree. So he's now passionately going to do that. So this is really important for. And then Francis Quigley talks about what was the conversation that's needed between contractors and farmers. A lot of this is getting lost in the circle of the farmer thinking the contractor knows best, the contractor thinking they're doing what the farmer wants, and both thinking they're doing what the neighbours looking in want or think is a good hedge. So it's very much to break the cycle, and I think that's where we need to engage with the non-farming community, so that when I leave my hedge a little bit less manicured, that I know they won't kind of think, God, they're losing the plot.
Yes, I understand. So yeah, we have to lose our fascination with precision, I suppose, precision trimming and so on. Pat, some interesting questions coming in there from our audience. If you want to, I'd like to go through.
Yeah, there's I suppose a couple of short ones. A great information, any biodegradable alternative to silage plastic for covering ground on new hedges?
I knew that would come. Yeah, I haven't found one, Pat, and I would love to. So please help me if anybody has other ideas. We are using old silage plastic, so it's we're reusing. And my 25 years experience is that we do not have a hedge with a dense base if we don't have plastic. So you have one choice or the other at this stage.
A question here just about, or maybe a caution about the availability of supplies of hedging plants, and I suppose just saying not to leave it too long if you're looking for it, because it mightn't be there.
Yeah, good point. And especially if you want to get the native provenance and the native species, etc. I think it's a really important one for next year. Yeah.
A question in relation to the dairy farm that you featured: is the motivation of the dairy farmer in the interest of biodiversity, or is he satisfying regulation, or what's his motivation?
No, definitely not for regulation. Definitely motivation, and he has a lovely 2-minute video clip during the week on Thursday, so we'll see that. But no, it's not. It's purely, I think it's coming back to the 4 reasons for doing anything for biodiversity. The law, isn't for, I don't particularly, not for the planting. We have the schemes, not in this case. Some people will be getting money in future years, please God, for doing this. But there's the marketing and the green image. I think a lot of our farmers really understand that. And number 4 is the nice to do it, the feel good, the nature, family farms, passing on a farm in better condition now that they know what the condition that it is. So yeah, no, I think they're the sort of farmers that are planting at the moment, Pat, the people who, are inspired to do so.
Okay, a question here, challenging. Are Teagasc leading by example?
Absolutely. I've just finished going around our 12 or 13 farms and recorded all the amount that has been planted, but more importantly, the plans for the next 4 years. So, and we have a lovely video clip from Caroline O'Sullivan in Teagasc Moor Park in Curtin's farm, where she documents what she has done and the plans for going forward. So kilometres going in on those farms, Pat, all our own farms. So we definitely are leading by example at this stage.
Okay, question here about in Kerry and Donegal, you will often see fuchsia hedges. What's your view on this species?
Yeah, fuchsia, it's not a native one. I suppose some of the coastal areas, maybe it's come in there. Look at where things are, and it's not causing it tends to take over. I wouldn't plant it, I suppose, but then I maybe somebody from that area would have a different view. But it's, yeah, and it's certainly something I wouldn't spread to other places. Sometimes people see something and think, oh, that'd be nice, and it's yeah, I wouldn't plant it normally on a farm.
Okay, a question there is Teagasc engaging with contractors on the issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I said, during Hedgerow Week, we always have done. I think the contractors are not the issue. I think the issue is the conversation and the general public kind of getting the contractors are being paid to do a job. They will do what is needed. But we all need to, more education, more general education, more so. In the media, we really need the messages this week to go out, because contractors will do what farmers want.
That's when I see our colleague.
I suppose a question there.
Sorry, Pat. I see Donald Flanagan is just warning about late planting. Their supply, he said, is already selling out fast. So not to leave it too late in the season purely for that reason.
So even if we're not planting until February, get your stocks ordered now. That's a really good point, Donald. Yes. Yeah, thank you.
So what I'll do is I'm going to just share the screen here, my screen, with just some details where people can access the content for next week's Hedgerow Week, and I'll just we can just talk while that's
and it won't
screen.
be up until each day. So just if people go in now, so it'll be additive as we go through the week.
So each day will be updated as the week goes by. Sorry, Pat, I interrupted you there.
No, you're fine. Keep going.
Did we talk about the toilet brush hedge? And I love that description. I think it's so.
But the picture says it all, doesn't it?
It does.
It does. And I think, you see, I think we get confused because in summer, everything looks lovely. We've all got good hedges in summer. And then the stark reality, if we're out in the fields looking at it this time of year, yeah.
So how do you bring a hedge back from that shape? Are you better off just to composite right back? And
if you want, again, it comes back to what do you want? If you want it dense at the base, you cut it at ground level. And again, we have a fantastic video from Owen Donnelly doing that with the hedge, and on our own farm in Clonakilty as well. But yeah, cut it back at the base. And you start again with a new hedge, but it's far different than a sapling because now you have a huge root system under the ground. If that's what you want, but I think the main thing is not to go back. What will definitely kill it, or what is killing our hedges, is where they're being hammered back to the same point every year. The hedges put huge energy into producing shoots, and then you take them all away. Now, there's no harm in cutting a hedge. I really like cutting hedges, but cut in the right way, little and often. As I said, always remember that picture, that diagram. You come out a little bit, out, and the new hedges to follow on there. I think I talked about the second year and the third year, you're going back with your pruning, and then very, very soon you won't be able to get anywhere in near that hedge. So the hedge cutter then trims it to a triangular shape. There's absolutely no excuse for new hedges or newly rejuvenated hedges why you don't get that perfect shape. and let them grow up and up and up as far as the hedge, the hedge cutter will reach. If need be, then you come back with a circular saw and reshape if need be. But in general, you're letting them up and up and up, but definitely cutting each year or every year or so. And every time you cut, you thicken it if it's done right. And that should also be good for carbon. We don't know the full story there yet, but dense growth sounds good for everything.
Catherine, there's just a question in there about the suitability of various plants in heavy soil conditions. Is there any variation in your advice, or
I mean, the best guide is to look around down your own fields and see what's growing well at the moment. But if you're in any doubt, the wetter soils, the alder, the birch, but look at what's growing well there.
And I suppose a question there in relation to the management of the hedgerows on banks, at ditches, or at beside drains. Any variation in the advice, or?
For the sake of the drain, I wonder, or for the hedge? Not particularly. I mean, obviously, but this is the point. We really should never manage unless you're deciding why you're doing it. So you may be trying to leave shade for the water, or you may be not, watercourses like some shade. They don't want all shade, is my understanding. So if you have hedges along watercourses, if you're thinking of the watercourse, you'd be leaving some, dense shade is good for the fish and some less dense shade. So a variety is a very good word to remember when we come to diversity, to come into biodiversity. We really want a mixture of everything on every farm, of every type of management. And you can argue for anything, I suppose, is what I'm coming to, Pat. So you can argue for doing any management. There is always some good reason for doing it. Well, unless the very bad management. Yeah. And again, just to reiterate, the bad management for the top hedge is the short back and sides without leaving a tree. The bad management for the untopped hedge is to top it at 3 or 4 foot. That destroys, it's neither a hedge nor a tree.
Okay, Mark.
Okay, well, look, we're just on time here. We have lots of questions coming through there, so thank you everybody for submitting your questions. Again, what I'm going to do is just show a screen here, share the screen with the details for you to gain access to all of the information about Hedgerow Week next week. But very simply, you can just go to the Teagasc website, and there's a very clear link on the homepage there, and it'll bring you to all of the various days.
And don't forget, sorry Mark, don't forget Stuart's presentation as part of our Hedgerow Week on this signpost seminar next Friday.
Absolutely.
Because mapping hedges is of huge interest to us. So Stuart is going to contribute to.
So absolutely, yeah. So we have Stuart Green joining us for our webinar next Friday morning, and he has some fantastic insights as to the digital mapping of hedgerows and maybe how we can get to a point where, particularly, I suppose, in the context of not just biodiversity, but carbon sequestration, obviously, is a big issue as well. So mapping from that point of view is very important. So, Catherine, thank you so much for your presentation today and all of the work. Congratulations on the fantastic schedule you've put together for next week, and really looking forward to seeing those videos and articles, and thanks to, I suppose, all the farmers and people who contributed to the content as well, and also our thanks to Minister Pippa Hackett for joining us this morning. And it's great to see the interest there, and great to see that we have a minister with specific responsibility for biodiversity. So with that, thank you very much for tuning in today. And as I said, I'm going to share the screen just with the details of how to access the content for Hedgerow Week. So thanks again, Catherine, and Pat, thanks for joining us and helping us with the questions. Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.